Before Rome was an empire, before it was a republic, before its legions conquered the known world and its name became a byword for power itself, it was nothing. A scatter of huts on a few muddy hills above a river crossing in central Italy. A small, poor, unremarkable settlement of farmers and herders, surrounded by more powerful and more sophisticated neighbours, with no reason whatsoever to suspect that it would one day rule the world. According to its own legends, the city was founded on a specific day, in a specific year, by a specific man, in an act of violence that would echo through all of Roman history. The traditional date is the year 753 BC. But the true story of Rome's birth is a tangle of two very different things. The dramatic, blood-soaked founding myth that the Romans themselves told and believed, and the slower, humbler, more mysterious reality that archaeology has uncovered. Today, we are going to explore both. We are going to tell the legendary story of how Rome was born, the wolf, the twins, the murder, and we are going to peel it back to reveal what really happened on those hills 3,000 years ago, when one of the most important cities in human history first flickered into existence. Using advanced AI trained on the legends recorded by Roman historians and poets, the archaeology of the earliest settlements on the hills of Rome, the study of the early peoples of Italy, and the work of modern scholars who have sifted myth from history, we have reconstructed the birth of Rome. Let us begin with the story the Romans themselves told, a story they believed to the depths of their souls. The legend begins, as Roman legends often do, with a fall and a flight. The Romans traced their ultimate origins back to the fall of the city of Troy, far across the sea. When Troy was destroyed, the story goes, a Trojan hero named Aeneas escaped the burning city, and, after long wanderings, came at last to Italy, where his descendants founded a royal line. Generations later, in that royal line, there came a wicked king who had seized the throne from his brother. To protect his stolen power, the usurper forced his brother's daughter to become a priestess, sworn to remain unmarried and childless, so that she could bear no heirs to challenge him. But the god of war, Mars, came to her, and she bore twin sons, Romulus and Remus. The terrified king ordered the infants killed. They were set adrift on the river Tiber to die. But the basket carrying them washed ashore, and there, in one of the most famous images in all of Western myth, the twins were found and suckled by a she-wolf who nursed and protected them until a kindly shepherd discovered them and raised them as his own. The twins grew into strong and natural leaders, and in time they learned the truth of their royal birth. They overthrew the wicked king who had tried to destroy them and restored their grandfather to his rightful throne. And then they decided to found a city of their own on the very hills by the river where they had been saved as infants. But here the story turns dark. The brothers quarreled over which hill the city should be built upon, and which of them should rule it and give it his name. They sought signs from the gods, but the omens were disputed, and the quarrel deepened. Romulus began to build the walls of his city, and Remus, in mockery and contempt, leaped over the half-built wall, scorning his brother's work. In a rage, Romulus killed his own brother, declaring that so would die anyone else who dared to cross the walls of his city. And so Rome was founded in Fratricide, in the murder of a brother, and named for Romulus, its first king. The Romans never forgot this dark beginning. The story of a city born from the killing of a brother haunted their imagination forever, a grim foreshadowing of the civil wars and the bloodshed that would run through their entire history. Romulus, now sole ruler, set about building his city, and the legend continues with another act of violence and cunning. The new city had men, the followers Romulus had gathered, including, by tradition, outlaws and refugees and the desperate. But it had almost no women, and without women, the city could not survive beyond a single generation. So Romulus devised a ruthless plan. He invited the neighbouring people, the Sabines, to a great festival. And at a given signal, the Roman men seized the young Sabine women and carried them off, an event remembered as the abduction of the Sabine women. War with the outraged Sabines followed, but eventually, according to the legend, the captured women themselves intervened to make peace between their new Roman husbands and their Sabine fathers and brothers, and the two peoples merged into one, doubling the strength of the young city. Romulus, the legend says, ruled for many years, organized the city's institutions, its army and its senate, and at the end of his life was carried up into the heavens to become a god. This was the story the Romans told of their birth, a tale of divine parentage, of survival against murder, of a wolf, of fratricide, of abduction and war and union, a founding myth as dramatic and violent as the people who told it. But what really happened? What does the evidence actually show? Here the story becomes humbler, slower, and in its own way just as remarkable. Archaeology tells us that the hills of Rome were not founded in a single dramatic act by a single man, but were settled gradually over a long period by ordinary people. The site had real advantages that explain why a settlement grew there. It sat at an important crossing point of the river Tiber, where trade routes met. It was a cluster of defensible hills which offered safety. It was far enough from the sea to be safe from pirates, but close enough to benefit from coastal trade. And it lay on the border between different peoples of early Italy, a natural meeting place. The earliest traces of settlement on the hills, particularly on the hill that legend named as the spot where Romulus founded his city, go back even earlier than the traditional founding date to small villages of simple huts. Archaeologists have found the post holes of these early huts, the foundations of dwellings made of timber, wattle and thatch, and the graves of the early inhabitants. The Romans of later centuries actually preserved on the sacred hill what they believed to be the very hut of Romulus, carefully maintaining a primitive thatched dwelling for centuries as a monument to their humble origins. The real birth of Rome, then, was a process, not an event. Over time, the separate villages on the neighboring hills grew, prospered, and eventually merged into a single community. The marshy valley between the hills, which would one day become the famous Roman Forum, the heart of the city, was drained and turned into a shared public space, a market and meeting ground, a crucial step that bound the separate hilltop communities into one true city. The early Romans were strongly influenced by their more advanced neighbours, especially the Etruscans to the north, a sophisticated people from whom the Romans learned a great deal about building, about religion, about writing, about the symbols and rituals of kingship and power. Indeed, for its first couple of centuries, Rome was ruled by kings, some of them apparently of Etruscan origin, who built the city's first great temples, walls, drainage systems, and public works, transforming the cluster of villages into a real urban centre. So the real Rome was born not from a wolf and a murder, but from the slow merging of farming villages at a strategic river crossing, shaped by trade, by geography, and by the influence of more advanced neighbours into a city that would, against all odds, go on to extraordinary things. Why then did the Romans cling so fiercely to the dramatic legend? Because the myth told a deeper truth about who the Romans believed themselves to be. The story of Romulus and Remus was a story about the Roman character as the Romans understood it. It told them they were descended from a god of war and so were destined to fight and to conquer. It told them they were survivors, saved from death as helpless infants, hardened by adversity. It told them their city was founded by the tough, the desperate, and the outcast, men who built greatness from nothing. And the dark thread of fratricide at the heart of the story spoke perhaps to a people who would tear themselves apart in civil wars again and again across their history, even as they conquered the world. The myth was not history, but it was true to the Roman soul, and the Romans needed it to be true. They dated their entire calendar from the supposed founding of the city. They venerated the legend in their art, their poetry, their religion, and their politics. The she-wolf nursing the twins became the very emblem of Rome itself, an image still associated with the city to this very day. That was the birth of Rome, in legend and in reality. In legend, a tale of a war god's twin sons abandoned to die, suckled by a wolf, raised by a shepherd, and a city founded in the murder of one brother by the other, given the name of Romulus, its first king and eventual god. In reality, a slower and humbler story. Simple villages of huts on defensible hills above a river crossing, growing and merging over generations, shaped by trade and geography and powerful neighbours, into a small, unremarkable city that gave no early sign of the staggering destiny that awaited it. From these muddy hills and thatched huts, from this scatter of farmers and herders and perhaps outlaws and refugees, would grow the republic that conquered Italy, the empire that ruled the Mediterranean world, the civilization whose laws, language, roads, and ideas still shape our world today. No one standing on those hills in the 8th century BC could possibly have imagined it. But the birth of that small, tough, ambitious community by the Tiber, whether you believe in the wolf and the twins or in the slow merging of the villages, was the birth of one of the most consequential cities in the entire history of the human race. From almost nothing, Rome